Welcome, everybody, to Tales from the Cage. It's been a long time since we've done one of these, and who better to come back with than the one and only Mark Schultz? If you're not familiar, he is the 1984 Olympic gold medalist in wrestling. He is a world champion in wrestling, and to this day goes down as one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, regardless of what country they are from. That's Mark Schultz. He fought in UFC 9 against Gary Goodrich, defeating him via TKO. Mark, how's it going?
Hey, it's going good. Thanks for having me.
I want to start from the very beginning. Before you got into wrestling, if a lot of people don't know, you were involved in another sport. And I'm not referring to gymnastics, and I'm not necessarily even a sport, an activity of martial art. You were doing Tang Sudo, is that correct?
That's right.
And
Chuck Norris style.
that's the one that he started doing, kind of made famous over here, Korean martial art. Why? What got you into that?
Well, I was a gymnast before I went into Tang Sudo, and gymnastics was a great sport to give me athletic ability, but it wasn't giving me the confidence I knew I needed to be happy with myself. And then one day it just occurred to me if I could just beat up everybody on earth, I could be happy with myself, live with myself. So I quit gymnastics and I went out for, uh, I tried to find what I thought was the best martial art. There was back in 1976, there was a lot of, I don't know, argument and controversy over which martial art was the best, if a combination of martial arts was the best, or if one martial art was the best. And we didn't really know what was true. We couldn't find the truth very easily because there just there wasn't anything like the UFC around that pitted martial arts together to test which one was the most effective. And so we went off of what little we had in the media and in publishing and stuff. And in the media, all we had was, like, at the time, in 1976, we had Bruce Lee movies, and he had these Jeet Kune Do studios, and they were very sparse, rare, hard to find one of those. And he didn't franchise them out, he kept them to himself. And then he fought Chuck Norris in Enter the Dragon. Chuck Norris became famous, and Chuck Norris kind of franchised out these Tang Sudo franchises around. And there was one Tang Sudo club here in Medford, Oregon. As a matter of fact, Chip Wright still runs that club, which is amazing to me. Because, I went to that thing like almost like 45 years ago. And anyway, we didn't really know that much. We tried to, search things out in, like, Black Belt magazine. And so I just thought Tang Sudo was the thing, this is the best I could do with the information I had. And so I took that for about 4 months. And then my brother, who, I just happened to be born into the same family as the greatest high school wrestler in history. And my brother came up from Palo Alto and for my 16th birthday, and he said something really disrespectful to me. And I thought, because now I'm a great athlete. I can do 2.5 twisting, 1.5 backs off the 3-meter board. I can do 2.5 fronts off 3-meter board. I'm doing double backs on the trampoline and full twisting layout backs on the floor. And I was a Northern California all-around state gymnastics champion when I was a 15, 16-year-old. And so I was a really good athlete. And then I have these 4 months of Tang Sudo training. And so I had kind of thought or assumed that because the combination of my athletic ability plus what I knew in Tang Sudo would give me an advantage in hand-to-hand combat over my brother, who was about 30 pounds heavier than me. And so we went out on the front lawn, and I took a swing at him, and he double-legged me and got the mount and punched me in the face until I was just a bloody mess. And I was so humiliated that night. I slept in the car that night. I couldn't even walk back in the house. I was so humiliated. But the next day I said, screw Tank Cebudo, I'm going out for the wrestling team. And that's what I did. And from that moment on, I committed myself to wrestling until 1991, when I found Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Pedro Sauer. And so anyway, that's kind of how all that started.
So now, okay, so you mentioned that, like, all right, you feel happier knowing that you can beat anybody. Where did that come from? Is that like just a competitive thing? Was it a bully problem that you were kind of getting sick of other people? Because, I mean, a lot of people who get involved in martial arts, whether it's MMA or wrestling or anything, kind of start that way. And that's almost how I wrestled before I got into MMA as well, for something really similar, just to be able to fight better. But what was going on through your head? Why? Was it just like an age thing, or were you dealing with anyone from school, or what?
Yeah, it was. My parents put me into school a year early. I started the first grade at 4 years old. So I was always the youngest in my class. And I wasn't always the smallest, but I was always the youngest. And it was just, I was a really good athlete, but I wasn't that big. And I just, I had a severe lack of confidence. I couldn't talk to girls. That was a big thing.
Uh-huh.
And I just thought if I could just beat up everybody on the planet, I wouldn't be scared of anybody or anything. Or
Right.
you know.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Were you and Dave living together when this fight happened?
No, he was living in Palo Alto. My parents are divorced, and
Okay.
I jumped back and forth between Palo Alto and Ashland, Oregon. At the time, I was having some problems, personal problems, and I was living with my dad. And then I moved to Oregon, and I started wrestling. First I took Tank Cebudo. I quit gymnastics. I took Tank Cebudo, then I started wrestling at Ashland High School, but I wasn't very successful. I only won 4 out of 10 matches. And then the coach kicked me off the team halfway through the year, after the season, because I wasn't winning enough. And I was earning my spot on the roster by winning my challenge matches, but he wanted to put the second string guy ahead of me on varsity, and I didn't think that was right because I earned my spot. So I complained to the principal, and the principal told the coach he had to put me back on varsity. Well, he did, but it ruined the relationship. Me going to the principal ruined the relationship between me and him, and I couldn't wrestle for him anymore. So I transferred back to go live with my dad again in Palo Alto, and I grew 30 pounds over my my junior and senior year, from a 130-pound junior to a 159-pound senior. And I only went to 2 tournaments my senior year, the Alisal, which I didn't win a match, and then the Monte Vista, where I took 3rd. But then a miracle happened to me. At the end of the year, I won the league, which was over 9 schools, the region, which was over 20 schools, the Central Coast section, which was over 90 schools, and the California State, which is over 1,000 schools. And it was so miraculous. I started to believe in God. It was just like incredible. And I'm the only California state champion in history never to win a tournament prior to the state qualifiers.
Now, what do you think that is? Like, were you practicing off season, or did you get like a hold of some go-to moves that were just working for you? What changed?
Well, I was a really good athlete from gymnastics. So I knew that I had better athletic ability than anybody that I wrestled. And I think all parents should get their kids into about 2 years of gymnastics before they do anything else, because gymnastics is so complicated. It's so risky. And back when I did it, it was even more risky. I mean, we didn't have the spotting equipment they have now.
Right.
And you can dive head first into a crash pit and not get hurt. But back when I did it, it was like a 4-inch foam pad with a spotter. Said, okay, go for it. I'll try to catch you. That was better. Yeah. And so we had to visualize these complicated, risky techniques in order to do them. And, you know, if you can visualize something as complicated as like a full twisting layout back or something, you can visualize any wrestling move after just looking at it one time. I mean, I didn't even have to have anybody explain to me how to do a wrestling move. I could just look at it and it was my move. It was very simple, but technique is the king of gymnastics. Conditioning is the king of wrestling and fighting and combat. You got to have cardiovascular conditioning, or, you know, that's what the game is, you know.
Yeah.
If you don't have that, it doesn't matter what you know, you can't do it. Everyone's trying to drive you into fatigue, you know, into exhaustion. I mean, you're practically suffocating. I mean, when you train in wrestling, you're like pushing yourself to practically suffocation like 4 or 5 times a day. It's just there's nothing harder. Anyway, I trained my ass off. Not only was I a gymnast, but I trained twice a day. Everybody else was training once a day. I trained twice a day. I'd go from my practice at Palo Alto High School over to the Stanford practice at our crosstown rival at Gunn High School. So I'd wrestle with my high school, and then I'd go wrestle with college guys. And college guys are like head and shoulders above high school guys, all of them. I mean, college guys that's the biggest jump in quality any wrestler has to take, is from high school to college. And so here I was wrestling with these good college guys from Stanford who I knew could beat anybody in the state of California. And I was doing pretty good against them. And I thought, when I first started wrestling, I thought it was kind of like gymnastics. You know, if you learn the techniques and you just executed them perfectly, they would work. It's not the way wrestling is. Wrestling moves never work perfectly. Sometimes they do, but it's very rare. You're constantly readjusting and readjusting and readjusting and move, you know, and you have to put explosive power behind these techniques to make them work. So once I got that down, once I figured that out, then I started winning. And I didn't. Anyway, I won the state in California. It's a miracle. It was the most miraculous year of my life. And I've had some really miraculous years.
Sure.
But that was definitely the most miraculous. And then I got a scholarship to college, but I only got recruited by 2 schools because the scholarships were all given away. Nobody knew who I was. I came out of nowhere. Even though I was Dave's brother, they didn't know he had a brother until I won the state. And now they're like, whoa, where's he going to go? You know, so Oklahoma State gave me a scholarship just to keep Dave. Dave was miserable at Oklahoma State because they wanted him to stay at 150, and he wasn't really a 150 pounder. So he wasn't happy there. He wanted to leave, and they wanted him to stay, and they thought giving me a scholarship would keep him. So they offered me a scholarship, but I didn't want to go to Oklahoma State because these guys are freaking killers. I mean, they're national champions, they're college guys, they're best of the best. If I go there, you know, confidence is either built or destroyed every day. And if I go there, they're going to destroy my confidence, I thought, every day. Because I only been wrestling 16 months. And so I chose an intermediate step, you know, that old saying, what does not kill you makes you stronger. It's kind of bullshit. If you put Mike Tyson up against some little kid and him beat the crap out of him, that kid's not going to get stronger. He's going to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
So I took an intermediate step and I went to UCLA, which is where all my friends went. And I knew some coaches down there. And it was a great place to have a freshman year because there was movie stars walking around. It was always sunny out. The beach was right there. There's girls in bikinis everywhere. And just, there was no pressure on us to win because nobody cared about wrestling at UCLA, which was a problem. After my freshman year, we actually had our first NCAA champion that year, Fred Bona at heavyweight. He died recently. But anyway, he was our first NCAA champion ever. But still, there was no crowds. There was no budget. It was a rinky-dink program. And so we thought if we stay here and win an NCAA title, it'll be a miracle. So instead of it being a miracle, let's go someplace where they expect it. And wrestling is important, like the Midwest, Sure. Oklahoma. Me and Dave both made the junior world team that year. We met the Oklahoma assistant coach, Jim Humphrey, on the junior world training camp. And we thought, let's go to Oklahoma. Let's transfer to Oklahoma and hang out with him. And he can coach us. So we went to Oklahoma and, the crowds are big. Wrestling's important. There's nothing to do on the Great Plains except beat the shit out of each other. So we walk into the room. Now, I knew Dave was going to make the team anywhere he went. Dave was the number one recruit in the nation. He was the freshman of the year at Oklahoma State. So I knew he was going to make the team, but I wasn't so sure about me because I'd only been wrestling 2 years. And so I walk into the Oklahoma wrestling room and I find out there is a killer at my weight, Israel Shepherd. Israel Shepherd's this black dude. He cornrows his hair. He's built like a Greek god. And this dude is quick. Him and me were the fastest sprinters on the team. And him and me, man, we went at it for a year. While I redshirted, he competed. And I kind of used the fact that he was cutting weight and having to compete under pressure as kind of a way to get an advantage over him. And so after about a year, I started beating him. But then the coach was Stan Abel was the head coach. And he was really good about moving me and Israel and Dave around. There's 3 guys at 2 weight classes. And so he redshirted us and wrestled Israel. And the next year, I went in at 67. Dave went in at 58, and he redshirted Israel. The next year, I move up to 77. Dave moves up to 67. He puts Israel back at 158. So the team is really tough. And anyway, I won 3 NCAA titles at Oklahoma and won the Olympics and the world's, in the UFC.
Did you ever see Jim over at Oklahoma?
Huh?
Did you ever see Jim Ross over at Oklahoma at all as a fan or anything or a supporter of the program?
Who's he?
He's the WWF commentator. I remember
an
interview where somebody mentioned that he's a big fan of your brothers. I didn't know if you ever spoken with him or not.
I think I did meet him. Steve Williams became a pro wrestler.
Yeah, that he managed him actually. He managed Steve Williams.
Right. So anyway, Steve Williams, you have to excuse my voice. I just had my teeth replaced. I had all my teeth pulled.
Really?
And replaced with implants. And Dana White paid for them. I couldn't believe it.
Really?
Yeah, they God bless you, Dana White. Yeah, he's the greatest guy ever.
Yeah, I've met him a couple times. I've eaten on his credit card once with Chael Sonnen out in Portland. Or the suburbs of there anyway. I think we were in Tualatin. All right, so you win the 1984 Olympics. Now that year, I'm going to ask you a question on this. All right, if you look at both the freestyle and the Greco team, the freestyle had much more success. I mean, almost all gold medals. I think there were 2 silvers. Greco only had 2 gold medalists, Jeff Blatnick being one of them, 1 silver, 1 bronze. What was the difference going on, do you know, between the Greco team and the freestyle team when it came to success that year?
Well, all you have to do is look at our feeder system. Our feeder system is our college programs. And collegiate style is much more similar to freestyle than it is than Greco. So there's a lot, most guys in the United States, once they graduate from college, go into freestyle because they're already pretty well trained in it from collegiate. And back when I was doing it, Greco was kind of reserved for the guys that couldn't make it in freestyle. And, no disrespect, Greco is really a tough sport. I mean, it's really tough. But it was much more difficult to make a freestyle world or Olympic team than it was a Greco team. So some guys would go to Greco just so they could make the world and Olympic teams. But, once they started specializing and getting good, we got guys like Steve Frazier and Jeff Blatnick winning the Olympics.
Right. What was it like meeting Ronald Reagan? I saw a picture of you and Dave with Ronald and Nancy Reagan. Was that right after the Olympics?
Yeah, if you won a medal, you got to go on this medalist tour. And our first stop was L.A., the Hollywood Hilton. And then we met Ronald Reagan, which was kind of an interesting experience because when I was at Oklahoma, we had a 118 pounder named Bobby DiProspero. And Bobby's dad came to visit us one time at Oklahoma, and he just happened to be the head, the top #1 guy in the Secret Service. And he's always standing right next to the president. And so when we met, Mr. DiProspero when he came to Oklahoma, and when we went to see Ronald Reagan at the Hollywood Hilton, he's standing right there next to the president. And me and Dave were standing, I'd say, about 3/4 of the way in back of the line of medalists. There's like a big, long line of medalists waiting to meet the president, get their picture taken. And we're standing about 3/4 of the way back, and Mr. DiProspero sees us, and he goes, "Hey, Mark, Dave, come on up here." And so we walk up in front of everybody else. We go through the velvet ropes, and he leans over to the president and goes, "These are the guys I was telling you about." And so we took pictures with the president, and then I'd like told him I'd vote for him or something. I don't know. I didn't know what to say. So then I turned and I was going to kiss Nancy on the lips like that. And she turned and kissed me right on the, I was going to kiss her on the cheek.
Yeah, on the cheek, yeah.
Right on the lips. And anyway, no tongue or anything, but
I hope not.
It's pretty gross. Anyway, that was fun. And then we went to Dallas, and then we went to New York City, and they had parades and stuff in those places. It was pretty fun because there was no rules on the plane. When we take off, we had guys standing at the front of the plane, standing on these magazines with slippery covers, and they'd surf to the back of the plane while the plane was taking off. And there was no rules. We were throwing, the stewardesses were just letting us do whatever we wanted. We were throwing, we were out of control. We were throwing peanuts and champagne, and we were shaking up Coke bottles and stuff, just making all kinds of messes and stuff. And anyway, it was really fun.
Yeah. So fast forward through your career, we were talking a little bit about when Pedro Sauer school. There's a story of you facing Hicks and Gracie. But what about you and Pedro Sauer? Did you guys get a lot of live rolls in? If so, how would that look?
Say that again?
So when you started training with Pedro Sauer, when you started doing jiu-jitsu years later, because I know the story that you faced Hicks and Gracie pretty much in a grappling match, not to the public, it was in the school. But I want to know what it was like rolling with Pedro Sauer. Was he more just teaching you moves, or did you get a lot of live rolls with Pedro, or no?
Well, I'd train with him sometimes, but I'd mainly be, a student in his class, training with, all the rest of the students. But yeah, what was your question?
If you rolled a lot with Pedro, like live rolls,
Yeah, I'd say so.
who do you think was a harder go, him or Hickson?
Well, Hickson's much bigger,
Mm-hmm.
and Pedro is one of Hickson's black belts,
Right.
and I'm one of Pedro's black belts. So Hickson is, I only had one experience grappling with Hickson. It was my very first submission grappling experience ever. And that's what introduced me to the sport of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And then I became a student of Pedro's. And I also trained a little bit with Walt Bayless and some of his students. And Walt has a lot of good leg locks and heel hooks and stuff, which used to be against the rules of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in competition, but it's not anymore at the black belt level. But yeah, I mean, I don't like to say this guy would beat this guy or this guy's better than this guy. I don't like doing that.
Mm-hmm.
People, they get really upset and they're really sensitive about this stuff.
But not necessarily between them two. Who gave you a bigger problem, or you know what I mean? Like, because
well,
style, there's rock paper scissors. Were there certain spots that Pedro would put you in that you weren't really used to, or?
Well, like I said, Hickson was my very first grappling experience ever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how would you feel if you didn't know any Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and you only knew wrestling?
Right.
And you're going against someone who doesn't care about being thrown to his back or laying on his back. And I mean, and who specializes in submission holds.
Right. No, I've been there. I remember my first day. Believe me. I'm on like year number 15 in jiu-jitsu. I remember day one, and I was the only wrestler in the room too. Probably similar to you. I mean, yeah, no, it's different. It's different. Not knowing which way to turn your arm or to crunch if you're in an arm bar, if you're in a triangle, not knowing how to posture. That it's a humbling experience. It's a learning experience too. Hank Abbott was trained with you a little bit before his fight with Dan Severn. Is that correct?
That's right.
How did that happen? Did he reach out to you, or were you guys already training, or what was going on with that? How did that come into?
Well, I had a heavyweight at BYU. His name was Mike Bolster.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of funny. Bolster means to boost. And he really boosted my confidence before the UFC. Because he would come in to the wrestling room and he would challenge me to fight him, no holds barred, like every day for like 3 months. And then Dave Beneteau came down and trained with me right before UFC 9, and I broke his hand. I went to Detroit with him and took his place. But Bolster was a very important component of that whole situation and experience, because he was friends with Tank. They went to the same college together. And Tank, I think, was state champion in junior college, state champion, or maybe a place winner. Maybe I don't know what he did in junior college, but I know he wrestled. And so him and Mike were friends, and he told me Tank wanted to come out and train with me before UFC, before the Ultimate 2, I think it was, in Denver, where Severn beat him. But he came out with Paul Herrera. I don't know, you remember Paul?
Yeah.
Gary Goodrich cop paw with a
Yeah, the crucifix.
elbow.
Yeah.
And anyway, yeah, Tank and I trained together for about 2 months, I'd say. And man, was he strong. I spotted him on a bench press one time. He bench pressed 500 pounds 5 times in a row. Anyway, he was a really good puncher. But he didn't have the conditioning that you really need to have if you're gonna, dominate in the UFC.
That's what I was about to ask, how his cardio was. I feel like his wrestling's underrated. Especially at that time, people just kind of saw him as like a headhunter, just a wild man, just swinging punches. But like you said, he actually did have a wrestling background that I don't think many people really gave him credit for at that time.
No, I mean, it wasn't like a real advanced level of skill, but he definitely knew how to wrestle better than most.
That's the thing, especially at that time when it was still a lot of traditional martial artists with not a lot of grappling at all, just what they saw Royce Gracie doing, I guess. Out of all the strikers at the time, Tank's wrestling was actually pretty decent. Anyone else at that time reach out to you to train? Anyone else in the UFC?
Well, yeah, Dave Beneteau.
Mm-hmm.
I got a call from Pedro one day, and he said Dave Beneteau is going to fight in UFC 9. He wants to come down here and train jiu-jitsu with me. Are you willing to train with him? I said, yeah, sure, bring him down. So he came down. We wrestled with each other for about 2 weeks. And then the last day we wrestled, I slammed him, and he hit his hand, and he broke this metacarpal here. And so I took him to the hospital, and the doctor said, well, obviously, if we put a cast on, you can't fight. This is about 3 weeks before the UFC 9. And he said, but we could put a plate in, fuse the two halves of the bone together, and you might be able to pull it off. So they put the plate in, and I went to Detroit with him, and somebody ratted him out at the press conference. I said his hand's broke. So the doctor came over, saw his hand, and said, I'm not going to let you fight. I go over to Meyerowitz. I see, can I take his place? Meyerowitz says to me, oh, that's a great idea. You're Olympic champ. When you lose, it'll be even better. So, anyway, the next day I was in the octagon fighting. Took Dave's place.
Yeah, against Gary Goodrich. There's a debate on Greco versus freestyle, even versus folk style, and what's the most effective style for MMA. A lot of times Joe Rogan, a lot of times I've heard him mention it, he always picks Greco. What's your take?
Collegiate, you got to ride and you got to escape. You got to take people down. And, just because you're a collegiate wrestler doesn't mean you don't know Greco or freestyle. Sure. But if you look at like Yo Romero, he doesn't know how to get off from the bottom, and he doesn't know how to ride. But look at Khabib. He knows how to ride. That Sambo's kind of like collegiate style in that way. Collegiate's a grueling style. It's a control-oriented style. You have to have a strong upper body to hang on to your opponent. You get riding time. If you stay on your opponent for a minute more than he stays on top of you, you get a point riding time. You get points for escapes.
Right.
So, that's important in a fight on the street or a fight in the cage. You got to know how to hang on to your guy and control him.
Speaking of Sambo, Khabib, Russians, the sport of MMA, if you don't follow wrestling, if you're not involved in wrestling, especially on the international circuit, A lot of, just casual fans might not have years ago understood the level that Russia is when it comes to wrestling. Did you pay much attention to Fedor Emelianenko at all? Because he was really kind of the first star out of there.
What do you mean pay much attention to him?
Did you follow his career at all as a fan, or just watching him?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Fedor's career?
Well, he was a combat sambo practitioner, where they strike in sambo, or at least the style that he did. They were striking, which is very close to mixed martial arts. It's almost exactly the same. I mean, you wear a gi on top and wrestling shoes on the bottom and a singlet underneath, but it's very similar. And it gave him a big advantage, just like it gave Khabib a big advantage.
Because I don't know if you follow much UFC right now. I actually don't that much. I'm very casual, unlike I was maybe 10 years ago. But I mean, there's a Russian wave going on right now. Let's just take it back to say 2003, 2004, 2005. In its prime, you as a wrestler facing Russians, did you expect that wave to eventually come to MMA after seeing Fedor and him bringing the popularity over there?
Did I expect it?
Yeah.
I wasn't really thinking about stuff like that, I mean, but when it happened, it didn't surprise me. I mean, those people over there, they're poor. Poverty is driving them into, fighting for a living.
Right.
You look at, Khabib lives like a billionaire compared to everybody over there now. So everybody wants to be just like him now. So it's no surprise. And they have a culture of that honors and respects wrestlers. I mean, a lot of the people in government are former wrestlers, So even though the Soviet Union broke up politically, the culture is still there, where they honor and respect. And a lot of people wrestle, especially, most kids, young boys, they learn how to wrestle when they're, like grade school, so it's not like America, where it's a much tougher culture, where they honor wrestlers like gods in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, go to Mongolia. Mongolia president's got cauliflower ears.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to list a couple names. Some from MMA, some who are just straight wrestlers, but all the MMA guys will be wrestlers. Give me your opinion on them, whether whatever first thing that comes to mind. If it's about their ability, if it's about them as a person, their personality, their credentials, whatever, First one I'm going to start off with, Mark Coleman.
Oh, man. Mark Coleman. That guy is probably the bravest person on the planet. I mean, he fought and won a one-day tournament against the biggest, baddest dudes on the planet. And he won. And he proved he was the toughest guy on earth, pretty much. And yeah, he's awesome. I wrestled him one time in a training camp, before he got into MMA, or before him, long time before MMA came to America. But yeah, he's amazing.
Randy Couture.
Well, I don't really know Randy very well. I mean, the closest I got to him was coaching across the mat from him when he was at Oregon State. But he's an anomaly. The fact that he competed for so long That's what surprises me most about him is how he competed at the age that he did. Because when I was like 36, I was just beat to a bloody pulp. I mean, my back was herniated and the discs were herniated. I just had so much trouble with my health that I but some guys just, they remain healthy longer. He was one of them.
His old teammate now, the Greco coach, Matt Lindland.
Yeah, he's a world silver medalist.
Yes.
And so he's a very tough guy. He was on the Dave Schultz wrestling team for a while, but I wasn't involved in it that much at the time. But I've done like a podcast with Matt Lindland before, so I know him pretty good. And I have a lot of respect for him. And as a matter of fact, when he was a kid, like maybe 10 or 12 years old, he came to a wrestling camp I put on at Rick's College in Idaho. And he said, I don't remember this, but he said, I said something to him that got him to commit to wrestling as his main sport. And that was, I said something like, look, if you don't, what did I say? I said, if you get really good in wrestling, you don't have to take shit from anybody. And so he liked that. He was like, I'm in. And this is when he's a kid,
Yeah.
But it's true.
Yeah, tough guy. I used to train with him quite a bit when I would fly out to Portland area. Very, very good wrestler. Really good coach. Explained everything really well. Like everything you need to know about wrestling. That guy's like an encyclopedia. Ben Askren.
Ben Askren is a great wrestler. He's a two-time NCAA champion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he was the outstanding wrestler in the NCAAs too. And then he won all those matches in Bellator, became Bellator champion. And then he did pretty good in the UFC. And then he took a big money boxing match with it. Guy humiliated himself.
Yeah. He left that laughing though. Like he had a big smile on his face. He made a lot of money from that. That's for sure.
He made $500,000.
Yeah. Unique style wrestler. Very unique. Henry Cebudo.
Henry is awesome. Henry was, me and Henry, we went to Mexico together. And I was the coach of Querétaro, stayed at Querétaro for 3 months. And he came down there for a little while. And but I tell you, that guy, he's a really funny guy. He's always smiling and cracking jokes and stuff. But he also gets really like dead serious if he has to.
Yeah.
And nobody messes with him, And what are you going to say? He's Olympic champ, he's UFC champ in 2 different categories. He's the only guy who's got 3 belts, I guess, or 3 titles, championships, whatever. That's why he calls himself Triple C.
Right.
But he just, his sister was just diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And so she needs everybody to pray for her. So I've been doing that.
Brock Lesnar.
Brock Lesnar?
Uh-huh.
Well, I mean, I don't know that much about all these guys you're talking about. I mean, Brock's, what am I going to say? I don't know any more about him than anybody else, really. I mean, I don't hang out with him. I don't talk to him. I just don't know that much about him.
How about let's switch more into wrestling and a good bridge from Lesnar. Kurt Angle.
Oh, Kurt! I have a book right behind me. It's called "It's True Is True." It's Kurt Angle's book.
Yeah.
Where they apparently when he went to Turkey, they thought he was me, and because everybody in Turkey hates me because I broke the Turk's arm, he was scared for his life or something like that. I don't know if that's exactly right. Yeah, Kurt's a very good guy. I mean, he was the first wrestler to join the Dave Schultz Wrestling Club after the murder of my brother. Even though DuPont was still paying everybody, he wouldn't take the money. He quit and went to the Dave Schultz Wrestling Club and then won the Olympic gold medal for the Dave Schultz Wrestling Club and then became a pro wrestler. I know. I thought, you know, Kurt and I have a lot in common. He kind of looks like me a little bit. And I kind of was thinking of going into pro wrestling myself just because, you know, I didn't know how to make money or how else. But I don't know. I didn't do it. I went into, you know, mixed martial arts instead. But Kurt is a great, he's not only an incredible wrestler, he is an even better person. His character, I mean, I think he felt it was immoral to continue taking money from DuPont after the murder. And a lot of guys still took money from him. I mean, it's very difficult to turn money down, but he wouldn't take it. So he's got a strong character, strong moral compass.
Have you wrestled with Kurt at all and trained?
No, never did.
Next guy on my list, John Smith.
Well, John, you know, he's the most successful wrestler in U.S. history. Got more world and Olympic titles than anybody. I was on the world team with him in '87. That was my last world championship. That was his first. And he's a very unique guy because he's so skinny. He's a tall, skinny. He doesn't look like a typical wrestler. You know, you wouldn't expect, you know, he'd be a wrestler just from looking at him. But he's very intelligent. He uses his leverage really well. And also, he comes from a very big wrestling family. The Smith family. He's got Pat Smith, got Leroy Smith. You know, his brother Pat's first 4-time NCAA champion in history. His brother Leroy was world silver medalist, 1-time NCAA champion. And so he had a lot of good workout partners when he was coming up through the ranks, you know, his brothers. It helps to have a brother. I know I have a brother.
Right. One more for you, Kenny Monday.
Kenny may be the toughest man that ever lived. That guy, man, he's tough. That guy is a nightmare. I wrestled with him. I never wrestled with him in competition. I wrestled with him in practice one time, and man, we hit heads really hard. This was right before the '88 Olympics, and that guy is a bloody nightmare. He wrestled my brother 15 times or something. And yeah, Kenny, he's probably the most athletic, explosive, talented guy I've laid my hands on personally in a wrestling room.
Really?
Probably. I think so. Well, maybe Jichiro Date, but he was kind of over the hill at the time. But if you look at Date, Jichiro Date was a Japanese guy. And he may be the greatest wrestler of all time. I mean, if you look at his final match in the '76 Olympics in Montreal, he goes up against a guy named Mansour Barzagar. And I actually brought Mansour Barzagar to America, and now he lives in the same town as me. And he's the first Iranian world champion ever. But Date was so dominant. I mean, every time he wanted to score, he just scored. Like he just explode and just boom. And he pinned everybody in the Olympics except the American. I think he beat like 10-3 or something. He was just so dominant. But yeah, Kenny Monday was just, that dude is a bloody nightmare.
So in 2003, you had the match over in Brazil for Jungle Fights. You had to take a boat to get to this thing, and Antonio Inoki promised you to do this work, and he would pretty much guarantee a career in pro wrestling in Japan. Missing anything out there?
That's pretty much it.
So he never contacted you again. Was your heart set on pro wrestling at that time? Like, did you consider reaching out to even like Kurt Angle or something? Say, hey, can you pull some strings to get into WWE, or was it just kind of, hey, you know what, Inoki didn't do it, I'm not interested anymore?
Yeah, it was so messed up. The whole thing was so unorganized, and it was just so confusing and frustrating, and just I was deceived. It turned me off to the whole idea of going into pro wrestling.
Really?
Yeah, it was so negative, so lousy. It was just, I mean, being an world Olympic champion is kind of a liability in a way, because you tend to believe that people are going to treat you with a certain level of respect and honor and honesty. But I never really imagined anybody trying to take advantage of me like that. And boy, I learned my lesson. I was lied to, and I was basically just thrown to the wolves for nothing. I mean, I ended up getting what, $5,000 for that thing, and it actually was on my official record for a long time.
I remember that.
They finally removed it. But
Did they fly you out there, or did you have to do that out of your own expenses, or was that like considered in the 5,000, or was it 5,000 plus travel, if you remember?
it was plus travel.
Okay. Were you doing any research or anything on pro wrestling before that, like starting to kind of get in the mentality or anything, or were you just gonna wing it?
Well, I thought they would be there to like teach me and like support me and like organize everything for me, but there was none of that. It was just like, here you go, good luck. And I was like, this can't be the way. This just can't be. I mean, I know that Kurt Angle, there's pro wrestling schools where wrestlers go to work together, to create scripts, and everything's everything is prearranged, and there was none of that in this jungle fight thing. It was the first event that I had ever heard of where they mixed real MMA fights with professional fake pro wrestling matches. And I thought that was kind of immoral to do that. It was, to try to fool the public. And I thought, it's really distasteful. I thought, at least in the WWE, everybody knows it's scripted.
Right.
But, and everybody knows the UFC is real. But to take an event and mix real MMA fights in with fake pro wrestling fights and try to pass those fake pro wrestling fights off as real.
I think it's that pancreas thing,
It was, I had no experience. This was my first time. And after that, I was so turned off. Inoki told me I still had an opportunity to work with him after that. And I said, no, you don't. We're not working together. Yeah.
Interesting. In your career of wrestling, who would you say your most difficult opponent was?
Probably Vladimir Medalist from Russia. He was the 86 world champion. We wrestled 4 times. I beat him 3 times. Ed Bannock was really tough. We wrestled 6 times. He beat me 4 times. Mike Schultz was extremely tough. He was the first American to beat me in 5 years. And Rico Chiapparelli was really tough. We had some really brutal matches.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm just talking about guys that I wrestled in competition.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of tough guys, you know, all of my opponents in the finals, you know, the Shear brothers, Mike Deanna, Dwayne Goldman, Don Schuler, Alexander Nanev, Reza Karabajak. You know, he was the European champion. He beat all the Russians, boycotted the Olympics. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think because of the boycott, my weight was decimated of talent. It's not true. There are a couple weights in the 84 Olympics that had really tough weights, like my brother and me and Barry Davis. Our weights were not wiped out. Our talent was still there.
Right.
So it was kind of, I don't know. It was a lot of guys won gold medals that probably wouldn't have. I mean, I'm not going to name names or anything, but it's true. They probably wouldn't have had, you know, the Soviet bloc countries been there.
Right.
But for us to win in a situation where, like in my situation, even though I won, I'm still only one of 7 gold medalists. Well,
right.
I don't really stand out among 7 gold medalists. Even though my weight class was a lot tougher than most of them. And Dave's is the same way. You know, he had Martin Nosp in the finals. Not only did he have Martin Nosp in the finals, he had to beat 3-time world champ Lee Kemp to make the team.
Yeah.
So he definitely had the toughest weight in the world in 84.
For you, I'm not going to ask who, in your opinion, is the greatest wrestler of all time, which you kind of went over that already. Opinion, who's the greatest wrestling coach of all time? I don't think that gets addressed enough.
Well, most people will default to that answer and say Dan Gable.
Right.
But that's just in America. I mean, you could say Cale Sanderson now, maybe.
Which that's a debate now, is between the two.
Yeah. I mean, I could argue for Stan Abel, my coach at Oklahoma. And he was a great coach for me. I don't know about anybody else, but he was great for me. But there's other guys like Mansour Barzagar. He was the national coach of Iran for 20 years.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it just depends, you know, the greatest coach of all time internationally or nationally or collegiate style or what, you know, you got to define it a little bit more, you know.
Entire sport. If put it this way, if you felt that somebody asked you, all right, we need one person to coach the Olympic team, and it doesn't matter what year, we're going to take year and age out of the equation, who would you trust the most to run a successful team?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Well, Gable coached me in the 84 Olympics, and I thought he did a really good job. So probably Gable. Probably.
Cool. All right. It's been a pleasure, Mark. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Till next time.
Thanks, Matt. I'll see you, buddy.